The gun was already on the table when Maren Tulley walked into the room. She hadn't meant to be there. She'd meant to be in the service corridor on the 42nd floor, pushing her cart past the closed boardroom door, keeping her head down the way she always did. But the catering elevator had jammed between floors again. It did that on cold nights when the hydraulics stiffened, and by the time the doors finally shuddered open, the only route to the cleaning closet with her supplies was straight through the glass-walled anteroom of Stellarion Capital's private conference suite. The gun was a matte black thing, sitting on the mahogany like it belonged there, like it was part of the agenda. Maren stopped. Her cart stopped. The wheels caught on the threshold strip, and she nearly stumbled forward into the room, grabbing the frame to steady herself, and, for one terrible second, she locked eyes with the man sitting at the head of the table. He had the kind of face that meant something in this city. She'd seen it in the financial pages, mostly. Once on the cover of a magazine she'd been using to line a trash bin, Corbin Ashwell, 41 years old. Controlled more capital than some small countries. Known in circles she'd never belonged to, as the kind of man who didn't raise his voice because he never had to. He was looking at her the way people look at furniture that's moved itself. There were 7 other men in the room. 3 of them had their phones face down. 2 of them had already turned toward her with the flat, assessing stare of men paid to neutralize inconveniences. One of them, broad-shouldered, standing near the window, had his hand resting very casually near his jacket's side pocket. And then there was the man across from Corbin Ashwell. He was older, silver-haired. He wore a charcoal suit with a white pocket square, and his hands were folded on the table with a stillness that felt deliberate and practiced, the way stillness in dangerous men always does. He was speaking quietly, in a language Maren recognized immediately. Romanian. She'd learned it from her grandmother, who'd come over from Iași in the 70s and never fully trusted English for anything that mattered. Maren had spent summers in that small Queen's apartment, learning to roll her R's and soften her vowels, listening to her grandmother dictate letters to cousins back home. Later she'd worked at a translation firm for 3 years before the company folded. She'd added Romanian to her resume, alongside the 4 other languages she spoke fluently, and the 2 she could get by in, and she'd gone on 112 job interviews over the following 2 years before a contact at a hospitality staffing agency had told her there was steady overnight work if she didn't mind the hours. She didn't mind the hours. She minded other things, but not the hours. What the silver-haired man was saying, quietly and politely, in the language her grandmother had taught her between bites of Kozenak and cups of thick coffee. What he was saying, with his hands folded and his voice measured, was this: "Tell your man near the window to sit down, or I'll have his knee replaced before the night is over, and then we'll discuss the real terms, not the ones on your papers." Corbin Ashwell was nodding slowly with the expression of a man pretending to understand something he doesn't. Beside him, a younger man, his lawyer Maren guessed from the stack of folders, was scribbling notes. The man near the window did not sit down. He didn't know he'd been told to. Maren looked at the gun on the table. She looked at the silver-haired man. She looked at Corbin Ashwell's lawyer scribbling notes that were, she was fairly certain, missing the most important part of the conversation. Her cart had a wobbly left wheel. It had been wobbly for 3 weeks, and she'd put in 2 maintenance requests that went unanswered. She thought about that briefly the way you think about small irritations when larger ones are too enormous to process. Then she cleared her throat. Every head in the room turned. "I'm sorry to interrupt." Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "I'm part of the overnight cleaning staff. I can come back. You should leave." The man near the window said it without looking at her, his eyes still on the silver-haired man across the table. Raphael. Corbin Ashwell said the name quietly, and the man near the window went still. Corbin was looking at Maren with an expression she couldn't quite read, not the dismissal she'd expected. Something more careful. "How long have you been standing there?" "I came in about 40 seconds ago." She paused. The service elevator was stuck. "And you heard. Your guest suggested you have your man sit down." She said it simply, without editorializing. "He said the terms on your papers aren't the real terms. He wants to discuss those next." The silence that followed was a specific kind, the kind that has weight. The silver-haired man unfolded his hands. He looked at Maren for a long moment with eyes the color of river ice. Then, in Romanian, he said, "Who is this woman?" Maren answered him. In Romanian, she said, "Someone who didn't expect to be here tonight. But here we both are." The room changed. She could feel it the way you feel a pressure shift. Something in the atmosphere, in the quality of the attention being paid to her. The silver-haired man sat back. One of the phone-down men looked up. Corbin Ashwell's lawyer stopped writing. Corbin himself was very still. "Sit down," he said finally, not to the man near the window this time, to Maren. "I have a cart. Leave the cart." Her name, she told him, was Maren Tulley. She was 31. She'd been with the overnight cleaning service for 14 months, which meant she had keys to 11 floors of this building and knew where every broken elevator was and which bathrooms the security staff used on their rounds. She told him this not because it was relevant, but because he asked, and she'd already decided that the only way out of this room was through honesty. "Languages," he said. He hadn't sat back down yet. He was standing at the far end of the table, and she was in the chair that had been pulled out for her, still in her uniform, her cart abandoned near the door. "What languages?" "Romanian, obviously. French. Mandarin, conversational, not literary. Spanish and Portuguese, close enough that I can usually get by in one if I'm fluent in the other. Some Russian. Enough Hungarian to understand the shape of a conversation if it's slow. Romanian." He said it like he was testing it, turning it over. "Where?" "My grandmother was from Iași. I spent summers with her until she passed." She paused. "She taught me that Romanian is a language people only teach you if they love you." She was trying to tell me something. Something moved across Corbin Ashwell's face. She couldn't name it. The silver-haired man. She'd gathered his name was Florescu, from the way Corbin's lawyer had addressed him before things got complicated. Was watching her with an expression that had shifted from threat assessment to something more like consideration. "Your interpreter," he said in English now, addressing Corbin while still looking at Maren. "He is not good." "My interpreter went home sick this afternoon," Corbin said. His jaw was tight. "I thought we were discussing terms, not requiring translation. You thought wrong." Florescu said it pleasantly. "There are layers to what I am offering. Layers your papers do not show. I prefer to discuss these things in my own language, where I am precise. Your man tonight." He nodded toward a pale, uncomfortable-looking young man sitting against the far wall who had clearly wanted to be invisible for the last hour. He was translating the shapes of my sentences, not the meaning. Corbin looked at the young man who looked at his hands. Then Corbin looked at Maren. "I'd like you to translate." He said it carefully, like he was aware of what he was asking. Both directions, full accuracy. Nothing softened. "I don't work for you," Maren said. "No. You work for a cleaning contractor who's going to get a very large check from me tomorrow morning, regardless of what you decide in the next 10 seconds. He held her gaze. "I'm asking you personally." She should have said no. She knew she should have said no, not because she was afraid exactly, but because yes was going to change things, and she was 31 years old, and exhausted in a specific chronic way, and she had learned to be careful about things that changed. "Full accuracy," she said, "both directions. Even the parts you don't want me to translate, especially those." She nodded once. Florescu was not trying to buy anything. That was the first thing she understood, and translated, and watched Corbin's expression tightened around. The portfolio Stellarion Capital had put together, 300 pages in the folders the lawyer kept touching, was a prop, a starting position. What Florescu actually wanted was access, not to the capital, not to the real estate holdings, not to the subsidiary network. He wanted one specific thing, a data infrastructure that Stellarion had acquired 2 years ago in a quiet purchase that had barely made the news. What that data infrastructure contained, Maren gathered, was not nothing. She translated. She kept her voice even and her face still. When Florescu used a phrase that had no direct English equivalent, a debt of the bone kind, roughly, an obligation that went deeper than money, she translated it as a generational obligation, and then, when Corbin looked at her with a question in his expression, she added, quietly, "He means something owed at a level where breaking it would be remembered." "By who?" She looked at Florescu in Romanian. "He wants to know who would remember." Florescu smiled. In Romanian, "Tell him? Everyone." She told him. The meeting had been scheduled for 2 hours. It ran past midnight. At some point, one of the phone-down men ordered food that arrived on a cart pushed by a different member of the cleaning staff. And there was an odd moment where that woman, young, maybe 20, with the particular speed of someone working her second job, glanced at Maren, and then at the table full of suited men, and then back at Maren with an expression that was equal parts confusion and something like hope. Maren gave her a very small nod. The woman left quickly. Around 11:30, something shifted. Florescu had been working toward it. She could feel it in the structure of his language, the way he was compressing his sentences, bringing things to a point. He switched into a Romanian dialect that pulled from older usage, the kind her grandmother had used for serious things, and he said, "Tell him that I know what happened in Brasov in 2019. Tell him I know whose name is on the transfer. Tell him I don't intend to use it, but I want him to know that I know. And then tell him what I'm actually asking for is much smaller than he thinks." Maren sat very still for a moment. She translated it, every word. The room went quiet in a different way than it had before. Corbin Ashwell looked at his lawyer. His lawyer looked at his folders. The man near the window, Raphael, had sat down sometime around 11, she'd noticed without anyone explicitly telling him to again. "Tell him," Corbin said quietly, "that I need a moment." She translated. Florescu nodded graciously and reached for the water glass someone had refilled at some point. Corbin stood. He moved to the far corner of the room, and without looking at her, he said, "Come here." She went. He kept his voice low, not a whisper, but directional. "How precise is your Romanian? I understand everything he's saying." That last statement. "Brasov," she said, 2019. A transfer with a specific name attached. He has documentation, or he wants you to believe he has documentation. He's telling you because he wants you to know the negotiation is not equal. But he's also telling you that he's not planning to use it, which means he wants a deal more than he wants leverage. She paused. He thinks what he's asking for is proportionate. He might be right. Corbin was quiet. He was looking at the middle distance with the expression of someone doing very fast mental arithmetic. "You're a cleaning contractor. Tonight, I'm a translator." She glanced at her cart near the door. "And I still have the 4th floor bathrooms." Something shifted in his expression that wasn't quite a smile. "You'll stay. I'll stay until this is done," she said. "Then I'm finishing my shift." She almost didn't stay. Around midnight, when Florescu had stepped out for a brief phone call, Corbin's lawyer, his name was Whitmore, she'd caught it from a document header, pulled Corbin aside in a way that was meant to exclude her, and didn't quite succeed because she was standing 4 feet away getting a cup of water from the credenza. "We don't know this woman," Whitmore said very quietly. "We don't know her background, her clearance level. She could be placed here. She could be his. She works for a cleaning service. That could be a cover." She translated his threat in real time before we could have arranged anything. There were cameras in this room before tonight. Maren set down her water cup. She turned around. Both men looked at her. "I'm not his," she said. "I have an employee ID, a timesheet with my punch-in from 9/17 this evening, and 14 months of work records with the service contractor. I can give you my grandmother's name and her address in Queens from 1987, if that helps establish that the Romanian is genuine." She looked at Whitmore specifically. "And if I were placed here, I would have had enough information to give Mr. Florescu something much more useful than a heads-up that his man near the window was being watched. I would have simply let this meeting collapse." Whitmore opened his mouth. She stays, Corbin said. Whitmore closed his mouth. When Florescu came back in, slightly more relaxed from whatever the phone call had resolved, the meeting resumed. The second crisis came at 12:41. Florescu's associate, a quieter man who'd been introduced as a business partner and had contributed almost nothing to the conversation, leaned over and said something to Florescu in a rapid, muffled undertone that Maren almost missed. Almost, he'd said, in Romanian. The Zanetti side already made contact. They're offering the same access. Plus the Lisbon accounts. We may not need this. Florescu had not looked alarmed. He'd nodded once, slowly. Maren translated it. She felt the table shift. Not literally, but she felt it in the way the air changed. In the way Corbin went very still in the specific manner of someone deciding something. You weren't going to tell him that, Whitmore said, staring at her. He said full accuracy, Maren said, both directions, even the parts he didn't want translated. Corbin looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Florescu. The Zanetti offer, he said, doesn't include what we have in the infrastructure itself. It includes access to a shell. They're offering you the door, not the room. Florescu's expression shifted slightly. He looked at Maren. In Romanian, he knows the difference? Maren looked at Corbin. He wants to know if you understand the distinction. Tell him yes, Corbin said. And tell him I'll show him why. What followed was 40 minutes that Maren would later describe to the one friend she trusted with strange stories as the most interesting contract negotiation I've ever accidentally witnessed. Corbin dismantled the Zanetti comparison methodically. Florescu pushed back in the precise, technical way of someone who has prepared for this. Maren translated, and occasionally, when a concept required more than words, she said so, and offered context, and both men accepted this without comment, as though she had always been part of the table, rather than someone who'd stumbled through the wrong door. At 1:45 in the morning, they reached terms. Florescu reached across the table and shook Corbin's hand. Then, before anyone expected it, he looked at Maren and extended his hand to her as well. She shook it. You are precise, he said in English, and you are fair. That is a rare combination. My grandmother taught me that words are promises, she said. You should be careful which ones you make. Florescu laughed. It was a real laugh, brief and genuine, the kind that makes old men look briefly younger. Yes, he said. That is true. The room cleared slowly. Documents were signed. Phones were uncovered. The man near the window, Raphael, gave her a look on the way out that she couldn't interpret and decided not to try. Whitmore left without looking at her. Florescu and his associate departed with the particular unhurried confidence of men who had gotten what they came for, and then it was just Corbin Ashwell and Maren Tulley and her cart with its wobbly left wheel in a room that still smelled faintly of coffee and tension and whatever expensive cologne Raphael had been wearing. You should have charged us, he said. He was gathering a few documents from the table, not quite looking at her. Professional translators charge by the hour. I'm aware. I used to be one. He looked up then, she told him, the 3 years, the layoffs, the 112 job interviews, which she edited down to a long job search because she still had some dignity, the staffing agency and the overnight work and the building's broken service elevator that she'd reported twice. You reported it twice, he said. The maintenance request system has a 2-week response window for non-emergency items. She said it without particular bitterness, because the bitterness had been used up somewhere around request number 1. It jams on cold nights. Corbin was quiet for a moment. He looked, she thought, like someone recalibrating something. The firm you worked for, he said, the translation firm, Meridian Language Services, they closed in 2021. I know who they were. He set down the documents. They were bought, not closed. The acquisition was private. The staff was liquidated to reduce overhead. He paused. I know who bought them. Maren stood very still. If you're implying what I think you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you. He looked at her directly. A subsidiary of Stellarian acquired Meridian in March of 2021. The decision to dissolve the staff came from a cost reduction directive I approved without reading closely enough. He said it with the flatness of someone who has sat with a thing long enough that anger has become information. I didn't know the names of the people affected. There were a lot of lines in a spreadsheet. Maren breathed through this for a moment. "You should know," she said finally, "that I'm angry about that. I know. And I'm not going to pretend I'm not just because the context is strange. I wouldn't ask you to good." She took hold of her cart. "Because that would insult both of us." She started toward the door. She had 4 bathrooms left on the 42nd floor and 2 full floors below that, and it was nearly 2 in the morning, and she was tired in a way that went beyond sleep. "Maren?" She stopped. The way he said her name, not as a summons exactly, more like something he was testing for the first time, making sure it fit. "I'd like to offer you a position." He paused. "A real one." "Not." He looked at her cart briefly. "Not what you're doing now. You don't know anything about my qualifications. I know you speak 5 languages fluently, hold another 2 in reserve, translated a high-stakes negotiation in real time with no preparation, caught a piece of intelligence that would have cost us the entire deal, and told my lawyer he was wrong to his face without raising your voice." He looked at her. "I think I know enough. She should have been cautious." She was by nature and by experience a cautious person. She thought about the service elevator. She thought about maintenance request number 1 and maintenance request number 2. She thought about the row of folders Whitmore had been touching all night, and the way Corbin had said especially those when she'd told him she'd translate even the parts he didn't want. "What position?" she said. "Director of Strategic Communications. The role has been open for 7 months. The last 3 candidates didn't last past the probationary period." He paused. "The issue wasn't competence. It was precision. People hear what they want to hear. You translate what's actually said. I translate Romanian, not corporate strategy. Same skill." He said it simply, like it was obvious. Different vocabulary. Maren stood in the doorway with her cart for a long moment. Down the hallway, the service elevator made a distant grinding sound that meant someone on another floor was attempting it again. "The elevator," she said. "The service elevator on 42. It needs to be fixed. I'll have it fixed tomorrow. Not for me. It jams for everyone." He looked at her. "I'll have it fixed tomorrow. And not just the one on 42. She thought about her grandmother, who had taught her Romanian the way you teach someone a language you love, slowly, with stories attached to every word. Her grandmother had told her once that the most useful thing you could be in any room was the person who understood what was actually being said, not what people meant you to hear, what they actually meant. Her grandmother had been, in her day, a very large woman. She'd taken up space unapologetically, told stories with her whole body, laughed from somewhere deep in her chest. She had never once, in Maren's memory, made herself smaller to fit a room. "Good rooms," she'd said once, "expand for you. Bad rooms make you shrink. Learn to tell the difference early. Kukuli, it saves time." Maren looked at Corbin Ashwell. She looked at the room, the long mahogany table, the city glittering outside the windows, the documents still spread across the surface where something significant had just been decided, partly because she had been there. "I'll want the offer in writing," she said, "full terms." Nothing softened. By morning, and I'm finishing my shift tonight. Something in his expression shifted, not a smile exactly, but the motion toward one. "Of course." She pushed her cart back into the hallway. The left wheel wobbled, then caught, then wobbled again. She'd put in a 3rd maintenance request, she decided, in writing. With a timestamp, she had 4 bathrooms left on 42, 2 full floors below, and somewhere ahead of her, eventually, a morning that was going to look different from the last 14 months of mornings. She pushed the cart toward the first bathroom and got to work.